The day I turned 18, they bought me a reality check instead of a cake. As my brother Tyler unpacked his $5,000 European souvenirs on the kitchen island, my parents looked me right in the eye. They calmly explained my college fund was gone. They had already decided I would fail anyway. So why waste the cash? I swallowed the heavy lump forming in my throat and gripped the edge of the wooden table until my knuckles turned white. They thought breaking me financially would keep me small. They thought poverty would keep me obedient. They had no idea. They were just handing me the exact blueprint I needed to completely ruin them. I moved out the next morning with 2 trash bags full of clothes and a burning tightness in my chest that would not go away. I relocated to Charlotte, North Carolina, taking a tiny, drafty studio apartment in a neighborhood where the streetlights rarely work. Survival became my entire personality. I worked graveyard shifts at a 24-hour diner, scrubbing grease off flat-top grills until my fingernails cracked and bled. I lived on discounted ramen noodles and whatever toast the cooks let me sneak into the back alley. During the day, I hauled my exhausted body to university classes, funding my own tuition through a patchwork of grueling academic grants. My parents did not call. They did not visit. They spent their energy curating a flawless country club image on social media, posting endless photos of Tyler discovering himself in Parisian cafes. The physical toll eventually caught up with me. During a brutal winter freeze, I collapsed from sheer exhaustion and malnutrition right in the middle of a double shift. The emergency room doctor told me my body was essentially eating itself. I missed 4 days of work, which meant I was instantly short on my rent. Desperate, delirious with fever, I texted my mother just to let her know I was in the hospital. 2 days later, a thin envelope arrived in my rusted mailbox. Inside was a generic $20 grocery store gift card and a sticky note that read, "Hope you feel better." I stared at the cheap plastic card while my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a notification from my mother's social media account. She had just purchased a brand new $1,200 camera lens for Tyler because he had developed a sudden passion for photography. The real escalation began a few months later. My phone rang late on a Tuesday night. It was my father, speaking with that smooth, entitled tone he always used when he wanted something for nothing. Tyler had decided he wanted to transfer to my university. My parents demanded that I sign over the lease of my affordable, rent-controlled studio apartment to my brother. My father actually said Tyler needed a quiet, creative space to focus on his genius, and that I could easily commute 2 hours every morning from a cheaper, more dangerous part of the city. I listened to the sound of his breathing over the receiver. I did not yell. I simply said, "The lease is in my name," and hung up. The retaliation was swift and pathetic. My mother launched a quiet, vicious smear campaign throughout our extended family, painting me as a selfish, troubled dropout who refused to help her own blood. I tuned out the noise. I poured every ounce of my rage into my university-funded educational tech startup. My platform was gaining traction, securing early-stage grant money. Tyler, meanwhile, was failing miserably, assuming I would always be his silent safety net. He applied for a highly competitive campus fellowship and boldly listed me as his primary academic reference. He never asked. He just assumed I would cover for his laziness like I had when we were kids. I walked straight into the fellowship director's office the very next morning. I sat in the leather chair across from Professor Hayes and clinically dismantled my brother's entire application. I kept my voice perfectly level. I explained Tyler's total lack of work ethic his inability to meet deadlines, and his complete non-involvement in the community projects he had claimed on his resume. The director crossed Tyler's name off the list right in front of me. Tyler called me screaming 3 hours later, demanding to know how I could sabotage my own flesh and blood. I leaned against my apartment wall, staring at the ceiling. I told him I was not his safety net anymore. And I blocked his number permanently, realizing they could no longer control me. My parents panicked. They were secretly drowning in massive credit card debt from funding Tyler's lavish lifestyle. And my startup was suddenly looking very profitable. They hired a sleazy, desperate lawyer and forced Tyler to file a formal intellectual property theft grievance against me with the university. They claimed I stole Tyler's coding ideas, aiming to get me expelled and legally seize my grant money to save themselves from imminent bankruptcy. I was pulled into the dean of students' office. My father sat there in his tailored suit, looking incredibly smug, while the lawyer slid a stack of fabricated accusations across the mahogany desk. They expected me to break down crying. Instead, I unzipped my backpack and dropped a thick binder right on top of their lies. I provided the dean with my complete digital paper trail. I showed the time-stamped GitHub commit metadata and the original Google document creation logs, proving I built the platform architecture 6 months before Tyler even enrolled at the school. Then I pointed out the exact clause in the university handbook. A formal intellectual property dispute involving federal grant money automatically triggers a mandatory mutual academic and financial audit for both students involved. The trap was officially sprung. Before the audit results were finalized, the university hosted its massive alumni and freshman gala. It was a high-profile event designed to secure donations from wealthy Charlotte socialites. Because of my startup success, I was invited as the keynote student speaker. My parents and Tyler sat in the front row, wearing their absolute best, completely ready to take credit for my hard work in front of the city's elite. They did not know I had spent the last 3 weeks volunteering on the event's audiovisual setup committee. 5 minutes before I took the stage, I waited for the technician to step out into the hallway. I leaned over the master control laptop and swapped the approved, boring presentation file with my own unskippable, hard-coded video reel. I walked out under the bright stage lights and gripped the microphone. I looked directly at my parents. I told the crowd I wanted to thank my family for teaching me how to survive by tossing me to the wolves. Behind me, the massive projector screen flared to life. It did not show graphs or inspirational quote. It flashed enormous, high-definition screenshots of my mother's abusive text messages. It displayed the $20 gift card next to the receipts for Tyler's European vacation. It showed the exact message where my father called me a worthless disappointment. The room of wealthy donors fell utterly silent. The air grew so thin I could hear the hum of the projector fan. My father's face turned the color of ash. My mother physically shrank into her velvet chair as the socialite sitting next to her stared in absolute, visceral disgust. Tyler looked down at his designer shoes, completely humiliated. The presentation locked the screen for a full 60 seconds of agonizing silence. I dropped the microphone on the wooden stage and walked out the side door, leaving them to drown in their ruined reputation. The mutual audit concluded the following week with devastating results. The investigators discovered Tyler's entrance essays were entirely plagiarized, and my father had falsified their financial need documents to secure lower tuition rates. Tyler was formally expelled for academic fraud. Outside the dean's office, their sleazy lawyer realized his own legal license was now at severe risk. He loudly dropped my parents as clients right in the middle of the hallway. handing them an exorbitant bill for his wasted time. I had already visited the campus security office and secured a Title IX no contact directive based on their extortion attempts regarding my apartment. When my furious parents showed up at my dormitory later that afternoon to threaten me, they walked right into the hands of campus police. They were detained on the spot and slapped with a permanent, legally binding trespassing ban. I stood on the steps of my building and watched the officers escort them off the property. I did not say a word. The silence that followed them out was the most beautiful thing I had ever heard. I am standing by the window of my new, quiet apartment now. The rain is hitting the glass, and for the first time in my life, my shoulders do not feel heavy. If you are watching this, if you are the person always standing in the shadows of a golden child, you need to understand the psychology of what is happening to you. A narcissistic family system does not just prefer one child over the other. They actively need the scapegoat to fail. If you fail, they get to play the role of the martyred, suffering parents. But if you succeed entirely on your own, it shatters their fragile delusion of superiority. I paid for my freedom in blood, sweat, and starvation. But it taught me 3 unbreakable rules for life. Rule number 1 is that blood absolutely does not make you family. Loyalty makes you family. DNA is nothing but a biological accident. Respect is an active, daily choice. If someone uses your shared last name as a weapon to demand your silence and your money, you must cut the cord. Rule number 2 is that the best revenge against a gaslighter is a microphone. Toxic people thrive in the shadows. They rely on your shame to keep their dirty secrets hidden. They want you to protect their public image. When you turn on the bright lights and show the world their true face, their power evaporates instantly. You owe them no protection. Rule number 3 is that you must never fund your own destruction. Setting boundaries is not cruel, it is basic emotional survival. Giving your last dollar or your hard-earned apartment to someone who actively resents you will never buy their love. It only buys them better weapons to hurt you with. Have you ever been the invisible one in a room where you did all the heavy lifting? Have you ever starved while watching someone else eat a feast bought with your money? How did you finally stop seeking their applause and start clapping for yourself? Drop your story in the comments below. We have to remind each other that we never needed their permission to win. Educational breakdown segment. I know exactly what you are screaming at the screen right now. You are wondering why she waited so long to cut them off. You were asking why she even entertained that phone call about giving up her apartment when they had already treated her like garbage for years. It is incredibly easy to judge from the outside, but let me break down exactly why smart, capable people stay trapped in toxic family dynamics for so long. What you just witnessed in this story is a textbook psychological trap called intermittent reinforcement. It is the exact same psychology that keeps people addicted to slot machines. Her parents did not just torture her constantly, they starved her of affection and then occasionally tossed out a tiny crumb of hope. A quick text checking in, a $20 gift card when she was sick. When you are starved for love, your brain latches onto that tiny crumb and convinces you that the jackpot is coming. She was not stupid. She was biologically addicted to the hope that they would finally act like real parents. But once the illusion broke, she executed a flawless masterclass in financial and emotional self-defense. Let us look at the street-smart strategies she used to win. First, she used the audit strategy. Scammers and toxic people absolutely hate details. When they filed that fake intellectual property claim, they relied on intimidation. They thought the threat of a lawyer would make her hand over her startup money. Instead of arguing emotionally, She dropped cold. Hard metadata on the desk. By forcing a mutual audit, she turned their own weapon against them. In real life, when someone tries to extort you or claims you owe them, stop arguing and demand a full itemized paper trail. Toxic people will almost always fold when forced into the light. Second, she mastered the art of building the case. She did not just react in the moment, she documented everything. She kept the abusive text messages. She saved the receipts. She did not delete the evidence of her pain. She archived it. When the time came for the gala, she had unquestionable proof. If you are dealing with a toxic landlord, an abusive boss, or manipulative family members, keep a hidden digital folder. Screenshot everything. Emotional arguments lose in the real world. But time-stamped evidence always wins. Finally, she understood the concept of the buyout. Sometimes the hardest thing to realize is that you are never getting your investment back. She accepted that her college fund was gone and that her parents' love was bankrupt. She stopped trying to collect a debt they would never pay. She invested her remaining energy entirely into her own future. You are allowed to walk away from people who hurt you, even if you share a last name. Trust is earned, not owed. If you are sitting in the dark right now, wondering when it is your turn to win, remember her story. Your boundaries are your armor. Protect your peace. Protect your assets. And never be afraid to let the villains build their own cages. Subscribe for more strategies on protecting your life. And stay safe out there. I know exactly what you are screaming at the screen right now. You are sitting there asking, why did she wait so long to cut the cord? Why on earth did she even pick up the phone when they demanded she hand over her rent-controlled apartment to the golden child? It is incredibly easy to judge from the outside, but let me break down exactly why smart, capable people stay trapped in these toxic family dynamics for years. What you just witnessed is a textbook psychological trap called intermittent reinforcement. It is the exact same mental wiring that keeps people addicted to slot machines. Her parents did not just torture her 24 hours a day. They starved her of affection and then occasionally tossed out a tiny crumb of hope. A quick text checking in or a $20 gift card when she was literally hospitalized from exhaustion. When you are entirely starved for love, your brain latches onto that tiny crumb. It convinces you that the jackpot is coming. She was not stupid or weak. She was biologically addicted to the hope that they would finally act like real parents. But once that illusion shattered, she executed a flawless masterclass in financial and emotional self-defense. Let us look at the specific street-smart strategies she used to win. First, she used the audit strategy. Scammers, abusers, and toxic people absolutely hate details. When her family filed that fake intellectual property grievance against her, they relied entirely on intimidation. They assumed the sheer threat of a lawyer would make her surrender her startup money. Instead of arguing emotionally, she dropped cold, hard metadata on the dean's desk. By forcing a mutual audit, she turned their own weapon against them. In real life, when someone tries to extort you, stop arguing and demand a full, itemized paper trail. Toxic people will always fold when forced into the bright light of an audit. Second, she mastered the art of building the case. Notice how she did not just react in the moment. She documented everything. She kept the abusive text messages. She saved the receipts. She archived the exact timeline of her coding. When the time came for the gala, she had unquestionable proof. If you are dealing with a toxic landlord, an abusive boss, or manipulative family members, start a hidden digital folder today. Screenshot everything. Emotional arguments lose in the real world, but time-stamped evidence always wins. Finally, she understood the concept of the buyout. Sometimes the absolute hardest thing to accept in life is that you are never getting your initial investment back. She accepted that her college fund was gone forever and that her parents' love was entirely bankrupt. She stopped trying to collect a debt they would never pay. She invested her remaining energy entirely into buying her own freedom. 3 months after the gala, the silence finally stopped feeling like punishment. At first, I kept expecting the next attack. Every time my phone buzzed, my stomach clenched. Every unknown number looked like a trap. Every envelope in my mailbox made my hands go cold before I even touched it. Trauma does not disappear just because the villains lose. Sometimes your body keeps bracing for the next hit long after the room is safe. Then one morning, I woke up before my alarm. The apartment was quiet. No angry voicemails, no emergency demands, no guilt-laced messages about family loyalty, just rain tapping softly against the window and the low hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. I made coffee. I opened my laptop, and for the first time, I realized my entire day belonged to me. That was the real victory. Not the public humiliation, not Tyler's expulsion, not my parents being escorted off campus by police. Those moments were satisfying. Sure, they were necessary, but the real victory was smaller and quieter. It was buying groceries without calculating whether I could still afford rent. It was sleeping 8 hours without fear. It was laughing with friends who never asked me to bleed for their comfort. It was looking in the mirror and seeing a person instead of a problem everyone else needed to solve. My startup eventually received a second round of funding through the university's innovation program. The same donors who had sat frozen in horror during that gala presentation became the first people to ask how they could help. Professor Hayes introduced me to a nonprofit that supported first-generation students who had been financially abandoned by their families. 6 months later, I used part of my grant money to create a small emergency scholarship fund. I named it the Open Door Fund. Not after my family, not after revenge, after the door I had to open for myself when everyone who was supposed to protect me slammed theirs shut. The first student we helped was a 19-year-old girl who came into my office with the exact same hollow look I used to see in my own reflection. Her parents had emptied her savings account because they thought college had made her disrespectful. She sat across from me, twisting a tissue in her hands, apologizing for needing help. I slid the application toward her and told her something nobody had told me at 18. Needing help does not make you weak. It makes you human. She cried so hard she could barely sign her name. That night, I checked my blocked messages folder for the first time in months. There were dozens of voicemails from my parents, some furious, some pathetic, some pretending nothing had happened. My mother said Tyler was depressed and that I had destroyed his future. My father said I had embarrassed the family beyond repair. Then, buried between the threats and accusations, there was one message that almost sounded like an apology. Almost. My mother's voice cracked as she said they missed their daughter. I listened to it once, then I saved it to my evidence folder and closed the laptop. Because missing the version of me they could control was not the same as loving the woman I had become. Tyler eventually sent one email from a new address. No apology, no accountability. Just one sentence, I hope winning was worth losing your family. I stared at those words for a long time. Then I typed back the only truth that mattered. I did not lose my family. I lost my captors, and then I blocked him too. That is what healing really looks like sometimes. It is not dramatic. It is not always graceful. It is not some perfect movie scene where everyone learns a lesson and gathers around a table crying. Sometimes healing is a locked door. Sometimes it is a deleted contact. Sometimes it is choosing not to answer when the same people who starved you finally realize you learned how to feed yourself. If this story hits a place in you that still hurts, please hear me clearly. You are not selfish for wanting peace. You are not cruel for protecting what you built. You are not obligated to stay poor, silent, exhausted, or available just because someone once called themselves family. The people who benefit from your lack of boundaries will always call your freedom betrayal. Let them build anyway, leave anyway, win anyway. And when they finally come knocking, demanding a seat at the table they tried to flip over, remember this: you do not owe anyone access to the life they tried to destroy. You are allowed to walk away from people who hurt you, even if you share a last name. Trust is earned. It is never owed. Your boundaries are your armor. Have you ever had to use the audit strategy on a toxic person in your life? Drop your survival story in the comments below. And make sure to hit subscribe for more insights on protecting your peace and your assets. Stay safe out there.